What was your reaction watching this Four Corners program last night? Were you shocked to learn that a people smuggling kingpin could be living and operating his trade right under the government's nose here in Canberra?
Well, David, I watched the show, obviously, and there are serious allegations. Now, when we have people who have been granted refugee status on the basis of wrong information, that can be subsequently revoked. It's happened before, that new information comes to light and visas are cancelled. Of course, I've asked my department to examine this case to see whether there is a case to answer for his visa to be reviewed. These are allegations that have been made and they need to be seriously but appropriately dealt with.
Sure, refugees have had visas cancelled before, but this is an allegation of a people smuggler, kingpin no less, posing as an asylum seeker, gaining refugee status and then operating his trade here from Canberra. Were you shocked to even hear such an allegation?
Well, I know that there's people smuggling activity going on, David. Everybody knows that. Everybody
in Australia,
also,
in Canberra, in this country?
Well, David, if you let me finish the sentence. Also, I know that the Australian Federal Police have charged, I think it's 14 people smugglers in Australia, and that at least 5 people have been sentenced to up to 7 years in prison. So the Australian Federal Police does have a very considerable effort on this project, and of course I'm not able to comment on as to whether this individual was already under investigation or not. That's an operational matter for the Australian Federal Police, which I wouldn't publicly comment upon, but we do know that there's people smuggling activity going on. Of course there is. I also know that the Australian Federal Police deals with it very seriously. I also know that there are other people in detention who are detained because ASIO has a view that they are a risk to national security because of their links and involvement in people smuggling. Now, I'm sometimes criticised for having too hard a line on this. I'm sometimes criticised for having too rigorous processes in place and that it takes too long for some of these claims to be assessed. But I think last night's show provided two things. It provided I thought, a strong argument for offshore processing and some of the things I've been arguing for a long time, and also it underlined some of the complexities that are dealt with when it comes to asylum claims and people smuggling.
Well, it sure was a strong argument for a rigorous process, but this man and about 6 others were processed in a time period of 2 to 3 months and then granted refugee visas. That is fast by any standard, certainly compared to many clogged in the detention network. Did that alarm you, and does it concern you also, the allegations that one of them has a wife who works in your own department in immigration? Is there fast tracking going on?
No. Let me deal with each of those elements to that question. Firstly, yes, some people are processed more quickly than others. Again, I've answered questions that you've asked me, David, in the past, why it takes so long to process some people. It takes longer to process some people where their claims are either weaker or more complex. The department assesses people. Sometimes they're able to reach a quick assessment as to whether somebody should be granted refugee status. Other times it takes longer because there is a rigorous process in place. In relation to the allegation that there's a wife of a person involved is an employee of the Department of Immigration. That wasn't aired last night on the show, but I did hear the allegation made yesterday. Obviously, I've asked that all steps be taken to investigate that, as I've also asked my department to examine whether there's a case to answer for the permanent residency or the protection visas for any individual to be reviewed on the basis of new information which is brought to light.
Well, surely that wouldn't take too long, at least, to find out whether one of the Immigration Department's own staff is married to an asylum seeker who is granted a refugee visa fairly quickly.
Well, of course, the allegation's been made, David. It's a very broad allegation. There's many thousands of staff in the Department of Immigration. It's being checked thoroughly.
Getting back to Captain Emad, the man at the centre of this story last night, you said that you can't comment on whether he is already under federal police investigation. Are you able to give us any assurance today that he is being questioned, that he's not still operating his trade from Canberra?
Well, as I say, David, I've asked for a thorough investigation of his claims and his protection visa. Secondly, I don't comment on Australian Federal Police matters. They have ongoing investigations, active investigations into people smuggling in Australia and elsewhere. As to what individuals are covered by those investigations, for obvious reasons, David, that it could jeopardise ongoing inquiries, I won't comment on those suggestions one way or another, other than to say the Australian Federal Police takes takes these allegations seriously and would examine all information, information that was publicly aired last night, information that they would have through other sources in relation to all individuals.
What do you say to the suggestion that the government is aware of people smugglers operating in Australia and is perhaps monitoring them to try and catch the bigger fish up the chain? Has that happened?
Well, again, the Australian Federal Police has a range of operational activities that they use, and they make judgments based on each case. And of course, it's well known that law enforcement authorities will have a range of weapons that they use in terms of monitoring people and gathering the evidence. Of course that's the case, because they then want to get a successful prosecution. In relation to any individual matters, David, as to what the AFP would be doing about an individual, I won't be commenting.
Nonetheless, this was a pretty damning story, a credible program, a number of witnesses interviewed. Will it undermine confidence in the system?
Well, I think, David, it was a strong argument for offshore processing. I mean, there was an allegation that an individual came from Malaysia. I've argued on your show consistently and on media across the country consistently that the vast majority of people who come to Australia by boat start their journey in Malaysia, and that the only sustainable solution to this is to return them to Malaysia, not to process them in another country and then have them settled in Australia, as is the opposition's policy, but to return them to Malaysia to be processed alongside the other 100,000 asylum seekers in Malaysia. And I thought last night's program was good evidence that that would be a sustainable solution to the people smuggling trade, and a major breakthrough, as has been advised to the government by every relevant expert.
Can I turn to another issue? A boat that went missing back in October of 2009, just 17 nautical miles off the coast of Java. Now, Fairfax newspapers have reported that it was an AFP, an Australian Federal Police spy, that tipped off Customs and Border Protection to the fact this boat was in trouble, but they sat on that information for 4 hours because they were worried about disclosing where the intelligence had come from. Are those reports correct?
Well, the relevant Minister, Jay Sinclair, dealt with this matter this morning, and he outlined the AFP's operational response, which always puts human life first, of course, and that's a matter that he has dealt with and he has responded to appropriately as the Minister responsible for the AFP.
But is it possible that information, if it does come from an Australian spy, could delay an emergency response to a boat in trouble?
Well, the Australian authorities will always put human life first. Clearly, that is the appropriate thing to do.
And did that happen in this case?
Well, as I say, Jay Sinclair has responded to that allegation this morning in a holistic way, and clearly, I mean, the allegation that Australian law enforcement authorities would put people's lives at risk is a very serious one and shouldn't be bandied around lightly.
And finally, Minister, can I turn to the Enterprise Migration Agreement issue, which has caused some grief within Labor? A simple question. When did you tell Julia Gillard that Gina Reinhart was going to be granted a deal to bring in foreign workers?
Well, David, I've dealt with this ad nauseum in the Parliament and elsewhere. I've made the statement that the Prime Minister's office was provided with a detailed brief early in the week of the 21st of May. I'm not going to provide any further commentary other than to say this. I'm very pleased with a policy which creates 8,000 jobs. And at least 6,700 jobs for Australians. I think we need to focus on the policy substance here, and it would be good to actually have a discussion about some of the threats to the mining boom in Australia. One of the threats being resources projects not being able to guarantee access to ensure that to skilled labour to ensure that the project finishes on time and on budget. Therefore, just as we announced in the 2011 budget that we would implement, we then worked assiduously to implement a policy which ensures this project goes ahead. I think if you listen to some of the commentary, you'd think there's only 1,700 jobs on this project and they were all going to 457 workers. The fact is, this is a project which creates 8,000 jobs, and in order to make sure the project proceeds, we've said that if they can't get access to enough Australian workers, we would allow 1,700 457 visas over 3 years. Over 3 years.
We understand that policy,
perfectly appropriate policy.
We still don't know when you told the Prime Minister, and this is important.
Well, I've answered the question, David. I've answered it.
Well, just tell us. When did you tell the Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister's office was provided with a detailed brief in the week commencing the 21st of May. I've answered that question.
But what about the Prime Minister? Did you talk directly to the Prime Minister?
Well, the information, David, was provided to the Prime Minister's office early in that week.
But did you talk to the Prime Minister?
Well, David, I've answered the question in Parliament. I'm answering the question now that the information
you haven't answered this
was
question.
provided
Did you
to
talk to the Prime
Minister's
Minister about
office.
this?
Well, David, discussions occur across the government between officers. I'm not going to play the game with you. I'm going to talk about the policy substance and this government creating jobs for Australians by ensuring a project can proceed that otherwise was in real risk of not proceeding.
All right, Immigration Minister Chris Bowen, thank you.
Thank you, David.